What would you say to somebody who buys only altcoins because Bitcoin is too expensive? Then they don't understand Bitcoin. They don't understand Bitcoin. Because in a couple of years, what's going to happen here is that we're actually going to move from a Bitcoin standard onto a SAT standard. And when that happens, when Bitcoin becomes expensive enough where we can't even put a value on it anymore, because when it gets high enough, if you think about this, let's say that Bitcoin gets to $3.5 million eventually in terms of fiat. How are you going to measure the difference between $3.5 million and $3.6 million is a lot, but in terms of like the tickers and measuring it, it's a non-starter. You won't be able to do that. And so we're actually, once the price gets high enough, we're actually going to fall to everybody's going to be valuing sats, not Bitcoin anymore. Nobody's going to know what a Bitcoin's worth. Only Bitcoiners will. But we're going to move on to a sat standard where it's going to be like 10 cents for a sat. No. Yeah, 10 cents for a sat. And then 50 cents for a sat. And then $1 for a sat. So the people who are buying altcoins because Bitcoin's too expensive just simply don't understand what's happening here. And then it's going to be $1 is equal to 1 sat. And then it's going to be $10 equals 1 sat. I don't know, there's going to be people in the comments, if people watch this. Somebody left a comment the other day on the channel saying, if one sat equals $1, then the price of Bitcoin is $100 million. They left a comment there telling me as if I didn't know that. Like, yeah, I mean, it sounds crazy right now because of where we are, but it also probably sounded crazy that when Bitcoin was $5, that it would be $70,000 one day. But if you have an understanding of Bitcoin and where this whole thing's going and how the rest of the world is on a fiat standard, Bitcoin has no top because fiat has no bottom. BTC Nostr newbie says 99% of crypto needs to die, in my honest opinion. I mean, they don't, though. They don't. There could be 1 billion altcoins. It doesn't matter. It has no impact on Bitcoin other than people will just take a little bit longer to get to Bitcoin, and they'll have to go through some painful lessons on that path to get to Bitcoin. And Zombie says, owning 1 Bitcoin is like owning 1 square mile of land. Nobody prices land in square miles because the price would be way too high. Exactly. And that, if you've been watching the show for a while, that's one thing that I've said. And kind of going along the lines of the moving from a Bitcoin standard to a SAT standard, is that the exact same thing happened with land. You can easily compare Bitcoin to land because they're kind of the exact same thing in a lot of ways. It's the closest thing we have to Bitcoin is land. And so when people came over here hundreds of years ago over to North America, the first people who showed up here, they got land for pretty much nothing because at the time there was a ton of land, there was a ton of supply, and there was no demand because nobody else was over here. So there was a very high supply and a very low demand for it. So you could get, they called it a township. That's what the first measurement of land was, a township. You could get a township of land for like $1 when you first came over here because the supply was high. There was a ton of land and nobody was over here. But slowly, as more and more people started showing up, the supply went down and the demand went up. So over time, as more and more people started showing up here, the price of land increased because the demand increased and the supply shrunk because it's a fixed asset. And the exact same thing is going to happen with Bitcoin. And so in the early days there, they didn't have acres of land. They didn't have lots. It was just a township. That's what the measurement was. But then as more and more people came, similar how more and more people are showing up to Bitcoin here, they went from a township to a section, to a half section, to a quarter section, to an acre, to a lot. That happened over time. When the first people came over here, they weren't measuring out lots. They didn't even know what a lot was. Maybe they did from the old country, but it's the exact same thing, and the same thing's going to happen with Bitcoin. Yeah, Bodhi says the supply went down and the demand went up, and they began subdividing it. And the exact same thing is going to happen with Bitcoin. We're going to subdivide it from Bitcoin to sats, to microsats, to minuscule sats. I don't know. I haven't came up with the further names yet. Working on it.